Welcome to this explainer. You know, when you hear the word geography, your brain probably jumps straight to physical maps, right? You picture mountain ranges, capital cities, GPS coordinates. It kind of feels like this very rigid, super objective science. But what if I told you geography is actually so much more than that? What if it's literally the invisible code shaping human behavior, power dynamics, and yeah, even your own identity? Today, we're going to challenge those baseline assumptions of yours and look at the world through a completely different, honestly fascinating lens. Let's get into it.
Okay, to really wrap our heads around this, we have to totally rethink our basic definitions. In the realm of cultural geography, space is essentially just the physical extension of the Earth before any social transformation happens. It's scientific, it's open, detached, and basically untouched by us humans. But place, or what we might call territory, is intimate, it's peopled, it's highly emotive, and it's heavily humanized. So the foundational rule for this entire explainer is basically this. We live in the Anthropocene. That means humans modify absolutely everything. We don't just live in abstract, empty space anymore, we live in culturally constructed places.
Section 1. Redefining the map, from locations to living stories. So we're shifting our perspective here. We're moving from just mapping out where things are to really digging into what things are there, and crucially, who decided to put them there in the first place. Think about an empty stretch of land for a second. How exactly does that totally abstract blank space transform into a meaningful human territory? Like, what's the actual mechanism that turns a space into a place?
Well, the answer lies in this really neat concept called territorialization. It's just a fancy way of describing the process where space is transformed over time by social actors, officially turning it into a human territory. It's exactly how we humans take an untouched, wild area and just inject it with meaning, purpose, and borders.
Okay, let's dive into this process. It happens in 3 distinct steps. First up is denomination, literally giving names and meaning to a place. Think about Paris, right? It's not just a set of coordinates on a map. The name itself carries this massive cultural weight. Step 2 is reification. That's the physical, material transformation. It's when we roll up our sleeves and build bridges, pave roads, and throw up skyscrapers. And finally, step 3 is structuration. This is where we create the systems, the policies, and the organizations to govern that space. A great example is Dubai, where tourism boards literally shape the entire city around the visitor experience.
To fully grasp how our understanding of all this has evolved, we need a super quick history lesson. Back in the age of discovery, we're talking 15th to 17th centuries, map-making was totally tied to exploration and European colonial power. Then by the late 19th century, this highly flawed concept popped up called environmental determinism. The idea was that natural climates actually dictated human culture, which unfortunately was often used as a moral justification to colonize so-called less civilized cultures. Luckily, the late 20th century brought us the cultural turn. This completely shifted the discipline. It helped us understand that culture is deeply, deeply embedded in geography, and that there's no actual hierarchy between cultures. Everything is just relational.
Section 2. Traces, places, and power. The invisible borders.
Now we get to explore how human groups actively build and restrict the world around us. Places are essentially built from what geographers like to call traces. Traces are basically the marks, the residues, or the remnants left behind by cultural life. They can be incredibly durable, material things like a massive monument in Trafalgar Square, or they can be completely non-material, like the local languages spoken, or the specific emotional responses a certain place gives you. Crucially, though, they can also be temporary human actions. Think about a pop-up place, like the Glastonbury Festival. It completely transforms a sleepy rural town into this gigantic cultural hub for literally just a few days, and then it's gone. And hey, we absolutely can't forget the non-human elements. Weather events and natural disasters leave incredibly massive geographical traces that just rewrite everything around them.
But here's the catch. Not everyone has an equal ability to leave those traces behind. And this is exactly where power comes in. Dominating power imposes what we call orthodox traces. Basically, it tries to make its specific cultural values appear totally natural or normal. For instance, designing urban spaces that inherently prioritize Western heteronormative family structures. On the flip side of that coin, we have resistance. Marginalized groups will intentionally challenge this domination to reveal that these borders aren't natural at all. They're deeply political. A really potent real-world example detailed in our sources is the use of graffiti on colonial statues. Defacing statues of figures like James Cook in Australia is a direct way to challenge and rewrite celebratory historical narratives.
Section 3.
the mobility turn, a world constantly in motion.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive conceptual shift in how we view our modern world. We used to think strictly in terms of roots. The idea of a fixed culture permanently tied to one stable place with a completely singular identity. But today, we live in a world of roots. We are totally defined by mobility, travel, migration, and hybrid identities. Our daily commutes, massive international tourism, and global migrations mean that our geography isn't static anymore. It's constantly in flow.
Which actually brings us to this incredibly profound thought from scholar James Clifford: pure natives have probably never existed. Because of global mobility, every single place on Earth is actually a giant mix of local and non-local traces. No place is truly 100% insulated from the outside world.
Section 4. Capitalism and the Landscape. The Business of Place.
All right, zooming out to the macro scale for a second, we have to talk about how global capitalism functions as a profound cultural system in itself. Its core economic logic, maximizing profit, drives the commodification of our geography. It injects capitalist value into local products, activities, and even our personal identities. It's gotten to the point where what you buy kind of dictates where you belong. We also see this phenomenon called McDonaldization. That's where the hyper-efficient principles of fast food spread across all of society, which often leads to this intense cultural homogenization all around the globe. This underlying profit motive links totally distant locales and completely reborders our everyday lives.
Of course, local cultures definitely push back against this. They use clever tactics like culture jamming to subvert these dominant corporate representations and messages. But what's really fascinating, and honestly a bit ironic, is how global capitalism responds. It uses a process called recuperation. Corporations will often just smoothly absorb these radical challenges, neutralizing them by adopting the activist language themselves. It's what we now commonly call brand activism.
Section 5. Identity and Bodily Borders. The Closest Geography.
Okay, let's totally shift scales now, from the massive scope of global capitalism right down to the most intimate place of all, the human body. Society, culturally and geographically, borders identities, essentially dictating exactly who belongs in what spaces. Historically, we've seen deeply gendered spaces, like the patriarchal restriction of women to the domestic home. We see stark ethno-racial borders, where minorities face tight spatial control, marginalization, or outright segregation. We see it with sexuality, where non-normative sexualities have historically been forced into specific, hidden urban areas. And we even see it with youth culture, because young people exist in this weird gray area between childhood and adulthood. They often lack a defined place, which leads them to claim the street as their own specific territory.
So, what happens when people defy these orthodox geographic borders? They experience what geographers call liminality. This basically means you are occupying an in-between or threshold position. Whether it's transgender individuals navigating highly gendered spaces or youth neo-tribes forming their own temporary communities, occupying a liminal space means you are positioned outside the normal cultural borders. It essentially leaves you out of place in the eyes of the dominant geography.
Section 6. Ongoing compositions. Places are never finished.
Now, what's really interesting about this next example is how it pulls all of these concepts together into one incredibly relational place, the World Trade Center. It was never just a building. It was this impossibly dense composition of traces. On one hand, it represented the financial heart of global capitalism. Physically, it was a massive material trace serving as an absolute icon of power on the New York skyline. On a national scale, it was a soaring symbol of America itself. And then, tragically, it became ground zero, a completely new place of affect, deep mourning, and a totally transformed identity. As you can see, places are constantly being written, destroyed, and rewritten by overlapping human actions.
Which leaves us with this really powerful summarizing thought. Places are ongoing compositions of traces. A place is literally never truly finished. It is simply a constellation of trajectories. It's a mix of the material and the non-material, the local and the global. And it is constantly shifting as different cultures and different powers interact with each other over time.
So, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocation today, based on your newly acquired geographical lens. The very next time you walk down a street in your hometown, take a second and really look around. What cultural traces are already heavily embedded in the concrete, the street signs, and the unwritten rules of that space? And perhaps even more importantly, what traces are you actively leaving behind? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the geography around you.